Ok, donc salut à tous. Alors ça fait au moins, je sais pas, peut-être la 10e vidéo que j'enregistre. À chaque fois il y a un problème. Il y avait un problème sur mon précédent appareil où je sais pas, j'enregistrais et des fois ça laguait, c'était pas bon, et il manquait des parties, des bouts de son et tout. Et du coup j'ai changé de machine, j'ai tout reconfiguré de zéro. Et donc je suis parti sur... on s'en fiche, mais juste vite fait, je suis parti sur Linux, et du coup ça fait des petits problèmes pour enregistrer. Ça fait quelques jours que j'enregistre des vidéos, il y a des petits soucis, des trucs à régler. J'espère que là ça devrait être bon. Et du coup on va partir sur un concept que j'avais envie de faire, j'avais déjà enregistré des vidéos dessus, mais voilà, des petits soucis. Et en fait le concept c'est comme vous. En fait, moi, je vis des cryptos et tous les jours, du coup, je fais mes recherches. Je regarde un petit peu ce qu'il y a à faire, ce qui se passe sur les marchés, un petit peu quel type de position je peux prendre et tout. Et en fait, je fais beaucoup, beaucoup de recherches. Typiquement, mes journées, ça ressemble à faire des recherches pour la crypto. Et du coup, je me suis dit, pourquoi ne pas partager ça sur YouTube, en fait, tout simplement, sur YouTube ou n'importe, sur X, peu importe, mais là ce serait sur YouTube. Et en fait l'idée ce serait, moi je regarde beaucoup de podcasts, pour m'instruire, pour un petit peu élargir mes opinions, découvrir de nouveaux avis sur le marché, découvrir de nouvelles thèses, un petit peu mettre en perspective les thèses. Et en fait un truc que je fais moi, c'est que je crois que si je fais hop, en fait j'ai une liste de tous les podcasts que j'ai écoutés. Alors j'ai commencé ça il n'y a pas hyper longtemps, mais... Alors attendez. Bon, on s'en fout de quand ça a commencé, mais... du coup j'ai une liste de tous les auteurs, de leur biais, du podcast associé. Et en fait ça me permet d'avoir un peu l'avis de tout le monde, enfin de tous les gens que je suis, d'avoir leur avis argumenté, leur biais. Et tout ça, en fait, ça me sert à me faire mon propre avis. Ça veut pas dire que je les suis, ça veut pas dire que je les counter-trade tout le temps, mais juste vraiment, je vois ça comme des gens qui exposent leurs arguments, pardon. Et moi, derrière, je vais venir mettre tous les arguments et peut-être m'aider de l'IA ou pas, ou de mes propres réflexions, pour en fait avoir mon propre avis sur le marché. Et j'ai envie que vous m'accompagniez sur ça. En tout cas, moi j'ai envie de partager ça, à voir si ça vous intéresse. Si ça vous intéresse pas, je ferai sûrement d'autres contenus. Le but c'est quand même d'engager avec vous et de partager des trucs intéressants. Donc voilà, je me base sur votre feedback, que ce soit les likes, des commentaires, tout ça. Donc voilà, sans plus tarder, on va commencer maintenant du coup. Et donc, lui, Taiki, c'est un mec, alors, son histoire est un peu marrante, mais je vais pas la raconter là, mais en gros, c'était un gros mid-curve, jusqu'à un moment où, en fait, il est un peu passé du côté du left curve, avec un énorme long sur Fartcoin, sauf qu'il a pas take profit, enfin, il a take profit, mais un peu tard. Et du coup, et depuis ce moment-là, en fait, il a fait des super calls. Et pourtant, tout son historique avant, c'était vraiment des calls de mid-curve. C'est pas pour critiquer, hein, je pense qu'on est tous un peu mid-curve. Mais c'est surtout pour dire que depuis quelques temps, il a lancé un short, je sais plus, franchement assez tôt. Donc assez tôt, mais genre vers là, je crois. Et il est repassé long vers là. Donc franchement, bravo à lui. Et en fait, moi, je mets un peu en perspective son avis avec celui de Benjamin Cohen, qui lui était bearish vraiment tôt. Hein. Je crois que vers là, il était bearish. Et donc les deux sont intéressants. Et j'ai juste envie, voilà, d'écouter ce podcast avec vous. On va l'écouter ensemble. Je vais mettre un petit peu, des fois, je vais un peu accélérer. Des fois, il parle. Des fois, pas besoin de regarder en x1. Et juste on va prendre des notes ensemble et puis à la fin on fera peut-être un petit débrief. Voilà, allez c'est parti.
Provide the market's much needed green candle therapy. In this video, I'll go over why I'm still bullish Bitcoin and why I added Zcash to my longer term portfolio. This is the agenda for the video. First, I'll make a case for why I think Bitcoin has bottomed. Then I'll give an update to my stretch thesis and talk about why I bought Zcash, and then end with my portfolio and my final thoughts. So let's talk about why I think we've bottomed and we're entering this new bull market. I made a playlist for why I think we bottomed. I know these videos are kind of long, but I try to respect your time to the best of my abilities. So I'll try to summarize my last two videos that I laid out in March and April in a couple minutes. But I think, when I thought that we topped, a couple months ago, six, 7 months ago, we had a situation where I believe we exhausted most of our marginal buyers. And at the same time, the DATs that took us to these higher valuations were mostly cooked, right? And now we have the inverse where I think we've exhausted our marginal sellers and the DATs are cooking, And when I say DATs, it's mostly Michael Saylor and strategy, but I think where Saylor goes, most other DATs will eventually follow. And I'll talk about that later in the video. I think, one thing that I've tried to do the last half a year or so is look at the flows, right? And I think these three questions are important, and it's hard to put position. And then ask yourself who's left to sell and who's left to buy. If you think about 6 7 months ago when Bitcoin was in the 6-figure range, people were saying Bitcoin to $250,000, $8 to $10,000 guaranteed for all season, which seemed like a great idea at the time, and I think that was kind of consensus. And the right thing to do was to literally dump these people, right? And one way, right, to think about marginal buyers and marginal sellers is think about, first of all, Saylor, MSTR is a form of marginal buying that has been predictable over the last many years and whatnot. But around October, November, we saw the MSTR now start to collapse. And I just thought that this was a signal to the end of times, and it was time to raise caution and, just be careful. And at the same time, Tom Lee, he was incentivized to just keep blasting money into Ethereum at the end of 2025 so he can get his 8-figure bonus. And once the new year turned, he was less incentivized to buy, and I think that provided a lot of fantastic exit liquidity for ETH holders or entry liquidity for ETH shorts. And now, if you think about what people have been saying the last couple months, after Bitcoin hit 60K, people have been saying, Bitcoin to 40, 50K, it's guaranteed, ETH to 1K, I'm going to buy this guaranteed Q4 bottom. And I think, these assumptions are fairly lazy. It doesn't mean that it can't work out. But first of all, who are the marginal sellers, right? We had the Iran war, stocks went down 10%, Bitcoin held 65K, and I'm not a fear and greed trader, but we actually had the lowest.
Je mets real question parce que, en vrai, je sais que les ETF ont quand même eu pas mal d'achats. Le truc, c'est que les ETF, moi j'avais vu que les ETF, je me rappelle plus des arguments exacts, mais les ETF, il y avait quand même des preuves qui allaient vers le fait que c'était vraiment du buy spot long terme. Voilà. Moi, je mettrais vite fait un argument sur ça. Pourquoi jeter du BTC spot? Alors après, on pourrait dire oui, flemme de gérer les private keys. Je dirais ouais, c'est peut-être un peu le but des ETF, c'est de vraiment juste acheter. Mais en vrai, si tu fais ça sur du long terme, faut voir quels sont les frais en fait. S'ils sont gros, ça reste quand même. Faudrait voir s'il y a beaucoup d'institutionnels, comment sont positionnés les institutionnels et tout. Mais voilà. Et du coup, il pourrait potentiellement y avoir plus de pression vendeuse. Mais c'est vrai que Saylor, il a été tellement violent avec ses achats. Je rappelle vite fait, je l'ai peut-être déjà dit, mais bon, c'est aussi la pédagogie. Mais ce jour-là, c'est le jour, donc le bottom, on va dire le bottom, la confirmation du bottom, c'est le jour où Saylor a augmenté le yield sur le stretch. Donc le stretch, c'est un produit à Saylor. D'ailleurs, il va vraiment pas tarder à recommencer ses achats. Mais bon, bref. Ce que je veux dire, c'est qu'il a augmenté le yield à 11... Donc je crois qu'il était à 10%, je crois. Et il a augmenté à 11,5% par an. Et du coup, ensuite le BTC a vraiment... Enfin, il a explosé un petit peu, explosé entre guillemets, mais il s'est quand même pris un bon petit 20%. Et les gros scandales ici, c'est lui qui achète plusieurs milliards. Voilà, il a acheté vraiment plusieurs centaines de millions par jour sur toute cette période. Ensuite, je crois que vers ouais, le 15, c'était le 15, ouais, vers le 15, je crois, le 15 mars et le 15 avril, c'est là où les achats ont un peu diminué. Donc là, on voit que la tendance a quand même continué. J'aimerais bien voir ce que ça fait un peu au contact de cette moyenne mobile 200 qui ne correspond à rien en weekly. Ouais, à voir. À voir, à voir. Mais du coup, ouais, grosse pression acheteuse et c'est un peu lui qui a marqué le bottom en fait. Voilà, c'est tout ce que je voulais dire.
Lowest monthly fear and greed print in the history of Bitcoin ever since this thing was created in 2017, or the fear and greed index was created in 2017, which is kind of crazy to think about. You know, Bitcoin's at 65K, 66K, and people were more bearish than they were after Luna collapsed, the AC collapsed, and after COVID, which seems crazy to think about. And I mean, even I find it hard to believe this is the case, but I guess if you log on to Twitter, right, everyone's depressed. Everyone's sold, everyone's rotated to stocks. Not to say that, you know, trading stocks isn't a bad thing, but, you know, if you're a Bitcoin believer, I mean, I think this is an interesting signal, you know, just buy when everyone's fearful, right? Seems a lot easier said than done, but it was something to at least consider. And, you know, I think the 4-year cycle is going to break, you know, and I think this idea that we can all sell together and buy the Q4 bottom is very lazy. You know, people have had 6 to 7 months to position for the 4-year cycle, right? And what I think happened is, you know, I think at 120K Bitcoin-ish, people were saying, okay, like the 4-year cycle is broken. We've entered a super cycle because of ETFs and Donald Trump, whatever, right? And once, you know, we drew down 40 to 50% and we hit, you know, 60 to 70K, I think the people that were bullish at the top, they finally capitulated, right? They finally bought into the 4-year cycle. They sold their crypto, you know, at 70K, assuming that, you know, they can buy 6 months later. But if you really think about it, you know, I mentioned, you know, Bitcoin not hitting new lows after the Iran war, but like for us to hit a bottom in Q4, we have to have people just dumping their coins in Q4, right? But if everyone has sold or everyone that wanted to sell has already sold, I don't really know what needs to happen for a new low to be formed. And of course, anything can happen, you know, like a recession, some quantum, like whatever. But you know, if you just really look at the market for what it is, look at who's buying, who's selling, and whatnot, look at the state of the stock market, I'm not really sure what it's going to take for us to trade lower. And I just thought that, you know, Bitcoin under 70K, like it was a great time, right? To at least take a risk, right? Take a bet, you know, at least, you know, start DCing. And that's kind of the point of my videos. It's that you want to sell when people are work and then just start buying when people are depressed. It feels really hard because we all want to log on to Twitter and then, you know, have everyone be bullish and then it feels comfortable to buy. But the best time to buy is when everyone is telling you to not buy, you know. And also to the 4-year cycle believers, you know, one thing I've been also thinking about is, I mean, yes, Bitcoin briefly hit new highs in October. You know, it kind of wicked to like 125K in October, and then just like immediately, you know, we have October 10th happen. But I also argue that I think peak euphoria happened when ETH hit 5K around August. This was when Tom Lee was just blasting, right? He bought like 3.5% the supply of ETH. I think ETH hitting 5K is a much more, you know, top signal vibes than, you know, Bitcoin just wicking to like 125K. And this happened in August. So if you believe that the actual top, you know, the euphoric top, the alt season top was in August, then, you know, we can already say that we're 9 months into the bear market. And, you know, 9 months, you know, like that's pretty close to a 1-year bear market. And the vibes for altcoins have been so bad for like over a year now. And obviously, like my videos, it focuses mostly on Bitcoin because I think Bitcoin is the most important asset. But it's something to consider, you know, maybe, you know, the summer is a reasonable time for risk to get bid back. I mean, you know, it's just a random thought. I mean, I'm not even a believer of like this 4-year cycle thing, right? But, you know, maybe in hindsight, people are going to, you know, look at this and be like, oh, yeah, actually, you know, you'd hit 5K in July/August. You know, I mean, maybe May, June, July is a decent time to buy. And then, you know, the money from the sidelines gets put back into the market. And then, you know, the vibes get better. And I call this green candle therapy. So, yeah, fear and greed, historical lows. Iran war could have hit new lows. Marginal sellers exhausted. And then Saylor is rising from the ashes like a phoenix. And then he's bidding Bitcoin, right? Buying billions of Bitcoin at the bottom. So let's transition to, you know, how Saylor's doing this and my stretch thesis that I've been talking about for a couple months. So, you know, so far so good. You know, the thesis has been playing out and I think it will continue to play out. So I've been tracking Saylor's buys every single month. So for the month of March, he bought roughly $1.5 billion worth of Bitcoin. And then in April, he bought roughly $3.4 billion worth of BTC. And you can see that generally most of his buying is done in the second week of every month. And we're early into May, so I think next week is going to be when Saylor starts buying billions, and then this week he might buy a couple hundred million. But you should expect a crescendo into mid month. And one thing that I thought was very interesting is if you look at MicroStrategy or Strategy's largest Bitcoin buy announcements ever, 3 of the top 10 buys have been announced this year. One in January, one in March, and one in April, which is kind of interesting to think about. So when I saw this, I was curious. So I decided to plot these moments in time on the Bitcoin chart, and it looks like this. So first of all, he bought Saylor started like the Bitcoin strategy, in late 2020, right? So maybe this is whatever. But usually he just top blasts, right? He top blasted in December 2020. He top blasted after Trump won. He did buy the dip once after Liberation Day, but usually Saylor, he buys a lot of Bitcoin when we're going parabolic. He's top blasts. That's his job. But recently, in the last couple months, he's actually been buying the dip, and I think that's very, very interesting. So I think looking at the price is less relevant. So I try to plot these purchases or these announcements on this MSTR MNAV chart, and it looks like this. So usually he buys a lot of Bitcoin when the MNAV is above 2, which makes sense, right? He can dump MSTR on the plebs, take that cash, buy Bitcoin, top blast, everyone's happy. But recently, the last 3 buys, it's been happening when the MNAV is around 1, which is really crazy to think about. Like, how is he doing this? He's found a new way to buy Bitcoin, and he's trying to increase coin per share. And I do think MSTR as the largest holder of Bitcoin is very important. And the fact that he's printing these gigabit candles when the MNAV is in the gutter, either this is a flash in the pan where he's literally lettering to the tits and then he gets liquidated, or the bottom forming in the MSTR MNAV. And if it's the latter, it's very bullish. And I think this idea of reflexivity should be taken into account where, when Bitcoin goes up, everyone feels better, right? And then it's like, wow, Bitcoin is a store of value. Donald Trump is the savior of crypto, right? He's the crypto president. And the fundamentals of Bitcoin is fantastic. Quantum does not matter because Bitcoin's at 6 figures. But when Bitcoin goes to 60K, 70K, it's like, wow, Trump is a scammer. Quantum is such an issue. And this happens for like BTC and Ethereum because it's really hard to value these crypto assets. So it kind of just goes off of vibes. And that's why I think, I've been talking about this green candle therapy idea where all it takes is a few green candles to just make people feel better about themselves. And then it becomes easier to buy crypto once it's already pumped a lot. But I think obviously, you make more money when, prices are lower, right? That's what I'm trying to do. And the reflexivity here with MSTR, Stretch, and Bitcoin is, Saylor buying billions, announcing like $3.5 billion worth of, Bitcoin buys in the course of 2 weeks makes Bitcoin go up, which makes sense. And Bitcoin going up expands MSTR's MNAV, which makes sense, right? Saylor is borrowing money to buy Bitcoin. If Bitcoin goes up, then that's accretive to MSTR shareholders, technically. And if MNAV goes up, it enables Saylor to raise more cash, which allows Saylor to, buy more Bitcoin or to raise more cash so he can borrow more money in the future. And this is a reflexivity at play. And obviously, can this go wrong? Yes. But I still think that we're fairly early into the stretch reflexivity. And I think, you're going to make more money betting that it's going to continue to work than to bet on the end of times and whatnot. Not to say that it can't happen, right? But obviously, it's been working. So why bet against it? And how stretch works, just to give you a little refresher, it looks like this. So this is the STRC chart. In the vertical lines, the yellow lines here mark the ex-dividend dates for STRC, meaning that if you hold STRC into these ex-dividend dates, you get the 11.5% APY rate or APR rate. And how Saylor uses this to make money or buy Bitcoin is whenever this thing trades above 100, so when there's demand for this product, Saylor can issue new shares, sell it onto the market, and then use that cash to buy Bitcoin with it. And yeah, you get, if you hold this thing, it's like a fixed income yield product and whatnot. So essentially, Saylor is borrowing dollars at 11.5% to buy Bitcoin, and as long as Bitcoin goes up by above 12% or so, it's going to continue to work, right? Which seems kind of dangerous, but obviously I talked in my videos that he can delever, right? He can just buy back, stretch, and retire. So one thing he can do is he can borrow billions of dollars to buy Bitcoin at 70K, and then if it goes to 100K, he can just sell MSTR on the plebs, buy back, stretch, and then he's delevered. He's allowed to do that. Not to say he's going to do it, but something he can do. And the stretch yield can vary. So if he decides that he wants to lower the rate, he can just let stretch trade above 101, and then he can lower the APY or APR to 11, 10% and whatnot. I think the equilibrium rate for STRC is going to be roughly 10%. It will help, right, if the Fed cuts rates, and then the hurdle rate will lower and whatnot. And stretch, if there's no demand for stretch, then he can keep pumping the rates. I don't think the markets would like stretch rates to be higher than 11.5%. I think it's more bullish actually if he lowers the rate because it signals more demand for this product and less future risk and whatnot. But that's kind of how it works. And the whole stretch and digital credit thesis that Saylor has, talked about is that it's going to unlock a new form of buyers that previously kind of owned Bitcoin. For example, BlackRock's iShares preferred an income securities ETF. This has been around for a couple decades. It uses the benchmark index by ICE, right? Not the one reporting and insuring people, but the Intercontinental Exchange. And ICE says, hey, Stretch is a good enough product. And the second largest holding in this BlackRock fixed income security preferred shares ETF is Stretch. Which is, we have all these anons on Twitter complaining about stretch, but BlackRock's like, cool, right? Let me just get that yield. Yum, yum, yum. Also, VanEck, their preferred securities, the same thing, right? And the AUM here is like 2.3 billion, so it's not that crazy. But this thing has 6% of the AUM in strategy, 10% in Boeing, interestingly. So, it's happening, right? The stretch thesis is that the boomers are going to buy this thing because 11.5% is good, and the boomers are buying, and then the Saylor, Saylor is taking the boomers' monies, and then he's buying Bitcoin with it, And if you really think about it, the boomers, they're not going to buy Stretch if they don't believe in Bitcoin, right? There's no reason to own Stretch if you think Bitcoin's going to go to 50K or something for 40K. You only buy Stretch if you think Bitcoin's going to go higher. So in a way, this is a boomer's way to bet on Bitcoin, to have a bullish expression on Bitcoin. And that's his entire thesis, because maybe, some of these ETFs or fund managers, they can't buy Bitcoin because it's risky and whatnot. But hey, you can lend money to Sailor so you can buy Bitcoin, and as long as Bitcoin goes up, it works. So it's technically, the boomers are buying. I think demand for Stretch indirectly represents a demand for Bitcoin. And I think that's something that people miss, because I've heard a lot of these complaints of, oh my god, like I don't like Sailor, Stretch, it's a Ponzi, and it does represent leverage, right? So it could end poorly, but Sailor can't print money from thin air, right? Sailor can only buy when the market lets him buy. So the fact that he's been able to buy billions of Bitcoin when the MNAV is so low, kind of represents that the market as a whole, whether you like it or not, is showing confidence in the future prospects of Bitcoin. Like I wouldn't buy Stretch if I think Bitcoin's going to go to 40K, but if I think Bitcoin's going to do well in the next year, then yeah, why not, right? And like I said, it's not about how you feel. It's not about whether you like Sailor or I like Sailor. In fact, I'm not. It's not like I'm like a Sailor Maxi, right? It's not like I own MicroStrategy yet, but I can respect that Sailor's buying, and if I want to make money, then it's like, okay, like Sailor is predictably buying Bitcoin in the first 2 weeks every single month. It seems like a good way to make money is to just own Bitcoin. If someone, right, is telling you that, this random entity is buying billions of this thing every single month, then I'm just gonna hold that asset and make money from it, right? So the big question is, okay, so it's May, Stretch is almost at 100, and I think we'll get there sometime this week. How much is he gonna buy this month? So for my Stretch thesis to continue working, I just need Sailor to continue, buying billions and billions of Bitcoin every single month via Stretch. It's okay if he doesn't buy, in a single month, and let's Stretch trade over 1, so he can make a lower rate and whatnot. But generally, you want, as long as Stretch is trading well, that's objective. I think Bitcoin is going to trend higher and grind higher, because I think there's not enough sellers, and Sailor's bidding will just continue to grind higher. I talk about this where literally all you can just buy Bitcoin at the end of every month and just make money, because Sailor, predictably buys. I don't think this will continue to work because it's so simple. But I think, one way to make money in markets is to understand something better than the rest of the market. And understanding Stretch, I think, was a good way to make money the last few months. And I think, as long as Stretch is doing well, you can continue to make money. Sailor's going to change this where, starting mid-July, he's going to try to do this semi-monthly. So instead of Sailor buying billions of Bitcoin in the middle of the month, he'll try to buy, twice, once at the middle of the month and once at the end of the month. So it's less easily front run, right? So it's harder to front run Sailor if he does this twice a month instead of once a month. And eventually, I think he's going to do this, 4 times a month, right? Like every single week, whatnot. And I think this is good. I think this will increase the liquidity profile for STRC and make it less volatile, which I think can attract more institutional buyers. And the point is, right? I think he's cooking. He's figured out a way to make Stretch work, and there isn't enough leverage on Stretch yet. I'd start to worry once people are like lever looping Stretch, right? Where use Stretch as collateral, borrow stable coins or like dollars at 5%, buy more Stretch, and then like do that 10 times over, and then it's like, wow, 40% APY, right? At that point, that could get risky. But we haven't seen that yet, so as long as people are very, very skeptical of Stretch and people aren't levering too aggressively, I feel comfortable just owning Bitcoin, being bullish Bitcoin, and then buying other risk assets in the cryptocurrency industry. So yeah, I think next 2 weeks he's going to buy a couple billion of BTC. Where did I get that? Just vibes. Honestly, I have no idea, right? I thought in April he'll buy like 2 billion. He bought 3.5, so maybe I should expect him to buy more. But Stretch, I don't know, right? Just a conservative estimate, and I think that's going to send Bitcoin above 80K. And I will eventually sell, and I'll talk about that later in the portfolio section because I am lower long, and I don't want to be always lower long. So yeah. Mid-curve, left curve, right curve, what do you call it, right? And yeah, Stretch is Ponzi 1 in tiers. I don't even think that's the right way to think about it. I think the right way to think about it is Stretch will pump Bitcoin, even if it ends in tiers, is at least the view that I have. And it's not all or nothing, like I said, he can delever, he can lower the rate and whatnot. And I don't think, right? I think people have been so bearish that, they're thinking about all the ways we can go to zero, right? Quantum, whatever, right? 4-year cycle and whatnot. And not enough people are thinking about what can go right, like maybe digital credit works, and the other DApps are gonna do it, and then that's gonna send us higher into a bull market, and then green candle therapy. It's something to consider, right? I'm not a prophet. I don't know what the hell's gonna happen. I'm just literally like a master of Ponzonomic flywheels in crypto and reflexivity, where at least I try to be, and that's what I'm at least bringing to your attention. So speaking of max reflexivity and whatnot, I did buy some Zcash. It's interesting. Let me talk about it. I'm not going to spend too much of time, but I do want to take you through my life journey as a cryptocurrency enjoyer, I suppose. And obviously, in the first cycle, and okay, I'm speaking for myself, and maybe this is relatable. But in my first cycle, right, I was like, I'm going to buy all the Ponzi's. I'm going to I don't care about risk management because I'm going to run it up to Valhalla, right? And my most viewed video on my YouTube channel is this one where I was like literally telling people like how Polyshark worked, right? It's like, okay, like every block on Polygon is 2 seconds. So there's one shark minted every 4 seconds. So you want to dump this every single, this was what I was doing back in the day. And this is literally like my most viewed video. So yeah, very left curve behavior. And then in the 2022 bear market, I had no risk management. Actually did a good job selling the top, but then I bought the dip way too early, and then I kind of got wrecked, right? And because I got wrecked in 2022, last cycle, right, from 2023 to 2025, I guess, I was mid-curve, and that's kind of what I'm known for, this mid-curve behavior, where I got wrecked in the bear market, I round-tripped some P&L, and then I just decided to just, focus on cash flow, right? I bought Ethereum, focus on DeFi, and I had this, I have this DeFi playlist, and I was like, oh my god, like I never tallied, that's bullshit, Ethereum and DeFi, oh my god, I bought Uniswap, I bought Aave, I bought MakerDAO, and I mean, in hindsight, like, these plays did well. I made some money, but obviously I underperformed. And then as a result, everyone thinks I'm this midwit, which I, honestly I am. But, I can try to at least, on my third cycle, I can have this view that, you know what, I learned from my first cycle, I learned from my second cycle, maybe I can maximize my gains in the third cycle by just betting on max reflexivity, right? Just like buy whatever goes up, it's nothing personal. Let's try to figure out what is the most reflexive asset. And if we are in a bull market, I want to buy that thing. And that's what I'm attempting to do. So Zcash, I think, is one of the more reflexive things that I've ever seen, and it doesn't represent like a huge part of my portfolio, but I did take a small position, and like I said, reflexivity is when price goes up and then everyone thinks it's like a fantastic thing, right? So like the fundamentals of something improves as the price goes up. That is what reflexivity is. And this is the price chart of Zcash over the last 9 years. I mean, there's a lot of history here, right? And I mean, I drew these like vertical lines, or sorry, horizontal lines, like between $23 and $500. That's a wide range, but there's a lot of history here. And Zcash is one of those things where when it's like under $50, it's like no one cares about privacy. Like honestly, when Zcash is trading like $40, like I thought this thing like is going to zero, right? It's like, yeah, like privacy, like who cares, right? But once this thing goes like $400, it's like, oh, privacy is a human right, where like no one cares about this thing at lower prices. But once it pumps, it's like, wow, like this is so important, guys. Like, don't you know that privacy is a fundamental right, right? And it's like one of those things where, yeah, like the higher this thing goes, the more it's like price leads narrative, like the more fundamentally sound it gets. And I'm sure you all remember this, but last October, like Naval, I mean, there was like this coordinated shill campaign from Balaji, Naval, Mert, Arthur Hayes, like whatever, right? They just decided like pump Zcash together all at once. And when this happened, I was like why, right? I was like, what is going on? And then Naval was saying Bitcoin is insurance against fiat, Zcash is insurance against Bitcoin. I'm like, okay, I guess. And I was mostly uninterested because I was like shorting alts in Ethereum, right? But I was forced to look into it, like whenever something pumps really hard, I think we're all forced to at least think about it. And when that happened, or when I looked into it, I was like, you know what, like it's pretty cool actually. It's been around, right? It's not like a VC bundled scam. There's like 9-10 years of history, so there's like it's literally like a cold coin, right? So I was like, like I'll ignore it, but I'll see how it does in a bear market. And recently it's gone down 75% from like 750 to 200. I mean, that was pretty brutal. And now it's starting to trade well. I'm like, okay, that's pretty interesting. And since it topped and we drew down a bunch, a few things have happened. So first of all, the SEC has ended its multi-year investigation into the Zcash Foundation, and no action has been taken. Also, the Zcash Open Development Lab, they raised a bunch of money from A16Z, Paradigm, a bunch of individual investors and whatnot. And one thing I've seen is that there's been a lot of A16Z, Paradigm.
Moi j'aime beaucoup la thèse Zcash et j'ai pour objectif d'accumuler 10 Zcash, enfin 10 ZEC gratuitement pour les mettre sur un cold wallet. Et comment je fais? C'est des positions de liquidity providing qui tournent et qui vont venir accumuler automatiquement du ZEC. Et voilà, si vous voulez plus d'informations, il y a un lien dans la description pour voir comment je fais.
A bunch of individual investors and whatnot. And one thing I've seen is that there's been a lot of lobbying efforts by players like A16Z to help make Zcash a more compliant privacy coin. And I know there's Monero, there's Zcash, and people think Monero is like the better coin and whatnot. But when it comes to these things, it's more about social consensus, right? It's like maybe Bitcoin as money doesn't really make any sense because no one's going to buy coffee with it. But if everyone agrees that Bitcoin is a better money than Litecoin, then yeah, Bitcoin is a better money than Litecoin. And I think Zcash, is going to be like this compliant privacy coin with a lot of backing. And maybe there's going to be some clarity with the Clarity Act or some regulatory action recently in the future and whatnot. And also, right, Zcash is more, I guess, quantum resistant in a sense. And because I own so much Bitcoin, I'm not, dumb, right? I am aware that, the Bitcoin community seems kind of complacent on the quantum front. So, it could be, it could make sense where Zcash is a hedge to Bitcoin. And like I said, price leads narrative, and if Zcash pumps, then I think this type of narrative around privacy, quantum resistance, etc., will get stronger and stronger. And if you're a mid-curve like me, I do think it helps to at least have some form of fundamentals. And if you look at this shielded pool for Zcash, it is going to the right. And I'm not the smartest, but I think how this works is, if you have Zcash, you have the option to put your Zcash into a shielded pool. And it's kind of like a mixer where, let's say I have 1,000 Zcash, I put it in here, and then, like more people put it in here. So it's like this, big pool of Zcash. And sometime in the future, I can just pull out Zcash in like a separate wallet, and then bam, right? It's basically like a mixer. And of course, yeah, like if I have 1,000 Zcash and there's like 10,000 Zcash in the shielded pool, then there's no way for me to use it, right? Because I would represent like 10% of like the shielded, pool. But if there's like 5 million Zcash as there is now, so basically the more Zcash or the more supply is in here, the more utility it has, because it can support more and more people to, I guess, privatize your money, I guess. Maybe this also represents a lot of supply. I don't know, right? I'm like a mid-curve. I'm trying to left curve, right? I'm trying to think less about like the fundamental value of Zcash and like cash flows. And like, if this pumps, it's gonna pump. So that's kind of like the approach I'm trying to take here. Of course, like privacy, I feel like a fugazi narrative, like it doesn't really matter. I don't know, but like I said, it's very reflexive. The higher it goes, the more privacy matters. Higher prices signal to markets that privacy is important, and it's working. And because Zcash lacks cash flows like Bitcoin, there's no floor, there's no ceiling. So if it pumps, it's gonna pump. If it dumps, it's gonna dump. Even recently, we dumped 75%. It's working matter. I don't know, but like I said, it's very reflexive. The higher it goes, the more privacy matters. Higher prices signal to markets that privacy is important, and it's working. And because Zcash lacks cash flows like Bitcoin, there's no floor, there's no ceiling. So if it pumps, it's gonna pump. If it dumps, it's gonna dump. Even recently, we dumped 75% price leads narrative. So, because I own Bitcoin and Hype, which you can argue has less upside, I guess, than other coins, it's nice to have, which you can argue has. So, because I own Bitcoin and Hype, which you can argue has less upside, I guess, than other coins, it's nice to have at least one reflexive coin in my portfolio that I can just completely left curve. And I thought Zcash was interesting, right? I'm trying to let the market tell me what to buy instead of like trying to, hyper intellectualize the future of finance, like DeFi and whatnot. And maybe that's how I failed as an investor and trader a couple years ago. And like I said, there's a lot of history here. This thing's been around for like 9-10 years. So if this thing breaks the range, like above $500, I think it can really get going. So I'm back. No, I'm gonna say I am Zodily, I suppose. Zcash, right? Same tokenomics as Bitcoin. It's range bound. It's currently roughly 0.5% of market cap Bitcoin. Right? Same 21 million supply, 4-year halving cycle. So if Zcash is like $400, Bitcoin's like 79K, right? It's like roughly 0.5% of market cap Bitcoin. The narrative can be, why can't Zcash be 1% market cap, 2%, 5%, 10%? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know, right? I'm just left curving it, right? Literally 60 IQ analysis. Zcash, cool. Privacy, all right, cool. Quantum, all right, cool. I'm in. Let's go. Left curve analysis. So yeah. That section sounded a lot better in my head. Now that I've spent like 10 minutes on it, it kind of sounds like really dumb, but maybe that's fine. Okay, so buying alts, so obviously I've focused the majority of my content on Bitcoin because I think Bitcoin is very important. And generally, coming out of bear markets, you want Bitcoin to lead, right? I don't think you can have a bottom where Ethereum is pumping, right? Like you need Bitcoin to lead us higher and rebuild confidence back into the space. And this is the Bitcoin dominance chart. I think the price action. It's not really price, but I guess like the movement in Bitcoin dominance kind of resembles that of last bottom, where I guess we had a double bottom here, right, double bottom here, and then Bitcoin starts pumping, and then dominance starts going up. I think this is healthy. I think this is what we want to see, and I really want to see.
Ça, je crois que c'est pas vrai. Et t'as, d'ailleurs, attends, on va remettre 2 secondes.
I don't think you can have a bottom where Ethereum is pumping, right? Like you need Bitcoin to lead us higher and rebuild confidence back into the space. And this is the Bitcoin dominance chart. I think the price action. It's not really price,
but sur le cycle précédent, ETH a fait son bottom avant BTC. Donc voilà, pas trop d'accord sur ça. Je vais montrer parce que voilà que vous voyez bien. Mais donc BTC, donc le bottom de ETH, si je dis pas de bêtises, je dis ça de mémoire, mais c'était vers début juillet 2022. Le bottom sur BTC, on voit bien là, c'est novembre 2022. Maintenant, on va prendre ETH. J'espère que je dis pas de bêtises, mais bottom sur ETH, donc c'était même pas juillet, c'était juin 2022. Et on a dit le bottom sur BTC, c'était novembre. Novembre, ETH avait déjà fait son bottom. Voilà. Donc ça a laissé une excellente deuxième entrée. vraiment excellente deuxième entrée ou près des 1000. Mais ETH a fait son bottom avant.
I guess like the movement in Bitcoin dominance kind of resembles that of last bottom, where I guess we had the whole bottom here, right, the bottom here, and then Bitcoin starts pumping, and then dominance starts going up. I think this is healthy. I think this is what we want to see, and I really want to see dominance go to 66, 70%. I think that's really, really good for the overall crypto space. And yeah, I think one thing that we learned last cycle is in like the first stage, right, in like the first inflection point from bear market to bull market, most altcoins, they don't really do much. Most of the altcoin gains happen during like the 5th and 9th inning of the bull market, right? So generally, I think it's best to just be bullish Bitcoin, and then after Bitcoin goes up sufficiently, like whatever that means, then the market will tell us like what gets bid. For example, Solana, the darling last cycle, kind of took this cycle, but Solana only really got going once Bitcoin went from 16 to like 35K. We had this god candle, and then we were like, all right, meme coin super cycle, boy, Solana is the competitor that you want. So I think right now it's gonna focus primarily on Bitcoin, and then as the market tells me like what's something, like maybe it's just best to buy higher, right? Just take my Bitcoin gains, rotate it alts, but like still focus the majority of my energy into BTC. Yeah, and this is what happens, right? I mean, people make money in Bitcoin, there's a wealth effect, and then people start speculating. I mean, that's literally what happened, right? It's like, I'm up some money in Bitcoin, I feel better about myself, and now I'm just 60 IQ longing Zcash, right? Like this is how we enter like a bull market. Like Bitcoin has to leave first. And one thing I've been thinking about is recently we've seen a bunch of these hacks, right? With KelpDAO, I mean, all these hacks, and maybe with the prevalence of AI and Mythos with Anthropic and whatnot, maybe there's gonna be more hacks in the future. I have no idea, and that could represent a structural headwind for like tech crypto, I suppose. The DeFi TBL doesn't look that great. Obviously, been coming down, which kind of really sad to see because like one of the reasons my channel exists is because I was teaching people, right, how to use Aave, and like being paid to borrow and whatnot. So it is kind of sad to see, but maybe this is a trick, right? Where VC tech, no one cares about that. L1 DeFi, it's hard to invest in those. So maybe the next bull market coming out of the bottom is going to be led by easy and simple to understand narratives such as store value, like Bitcoin, and privacy, Zcash, where there's less execution risk. There's always execution risk with, obviously with Bitcoin Quantum and whatnot, and Zcash with like the Zotto Lab and whatnot. But like, I wouldn't be opposed. Maybe. It's the tech one, the tech stuff, right? It's hard, right? Even with like my ETH short thesis, it's really hard to make a real bull case for most of these assets. So maybe like the fundamental value for trading and investing in blockchain tech is to just buy these, store value and like these really easy, simple to understand narratives that get really, really reflexive. Something to at least consider. But yeah, still a work in progress. And I ask myself, will people care more or less about privacy and quantum in the future? I think more. So why not just buy a little bit? Is at least how I think about it. So anyways, I'm not sure if that pitch makes sense, but I own Zcash, whatever. So my portfolio, I own a lot of Bitcoin, spot and perps. I'm like roughly 150% long, I think. And then there was some Zcash hype. And I will probably take some profits. So
donc il est all-in en fait là.
A little bit is at least how I think about it. So anyways, I'm not sure if that pitch made sense, but I own Zcash, whatever. So my portfolio, I own a lot of Bitcoin, spot and perps. I'm like roughly 150% long, I think. And then there was some Zcash hype. And I will probably take some profits. So as I mentioned with Stretch, most of the buying for Sailor happens in the second week of every month. So maybe this month or next month, I'll just close my Bitcoin perp long. Also, this isn't really relevant to you, but I turned 30 this month. I'm running a half marathon. I have a honeymoon next month. So I don't want to be constantly obsessed about like my liquidation price or like my funding rate and all that stuff. So I'll try to pivot into a spot holder instead of like this aggro prolonged guy, right? And just enjoy life that way, right? I think we all need to maximize our sleep-adjusted returns and live a comfortable life, and just buy stuff you believe in, and maybe a few times in the year there's gonna be like some crazy alt season, and then we can like lock in there. But yeah, just buy good coins. Bear markets give you a lot of time to research, position, build conviction, and most of the gains in markets is made holding an asset that goes up, and not into trading, right? So that's what I'm trying to do. Quickly talk about on-chain Stretch. I talked about how I think Stretch is going to be growing, and there's going to be on-chain versions. I've talked about this last few months, so not going to spend too much time. I'm farming Saturn. I also farm DPYX, but I'm mostly farming Saturn. Do your own research. It's not risk-free. It's just literally on-chain versions of STRC, and I think there's a lot of capital on-chain that's Stride, that's desperate for yield. Why not tokenize this thing? And what DeFi can do is you can loop this thing, right? I don't really recommend anyone loop Stretch, but I'm sure people will, and that's going to be good for Bitcoin. So hey, I'm going to farm these things. Yeah, and there's a chance that these two projects, when they TG, it can be like the first Sailor approved checkpoint. Where Sailor is incentivized to promote this thing because it lets him borrow more money. So maybe there's gonna be some structural tailwinds there. He keeps talking about like these like on-chain stablecoin, backdash Stretch and whatnot, tranching risk and whatnot. So this is gonna be done. And I think points farming for these things could be worth your time or your capital, your own research, etc. I think past 6 months there really hasn't been like a stablecoin farm that I could like recommend. I mean, you can also argue Stretch is not really a stable farm, right? It's like a stablecoin farm. But I think this is worth your time. I mean, not financial wise. I can only speak for myself, but I farm both DPX and Saturn. I'm in this one right now. TG, I don't know when TG's gonna be, but it started last month. And TVL is like 100 mil. Ideally, right? Season 1 might end when this thing hits $500 million. So ideally, we all farm this thing, and then on a random day, this thing hits $500 million, and then they launch a token, and then we all sing kumbaya. Anyways. I'm in a purple. I'm not even sure if it's worth my risk, honestly, because I don't even know how much I trust Curve, honestly. But hey, I'm in there. All right, so if you like the content, you can join my premium Discord. You don't have to, but yeah, I post 3 weekly premium videos. I share my portfolio in real time, post updates almost every single day. You also get a Discord community of traders and farmers and whatnot. Just if you're interested, but yeah, no need. But what could help is if you could help like this video, right? I don't run ads or sponsors on my channel, so that would really help. But no need, right? Honestly, just whatever. And final thoughts. Yeah, I'm not a religious person, but I believe in Bitcoin God candles. And I believe in this green candle therapy where people just all it takes is one green candle, and then people are going to feel better about themselves. And the green candle therapy is also part of my reflexivity analysis, where once people see green, they're going to feel better about themselves. They're going to start buying back risk, and then the vibes will recover. And then this is like how we heal as an industry. I think a lot of damage has been done with all the grifts and whatnot, but I think Bitcoin will lead the way, and I think that's going to do really well for the rest of the industry and for those that believe that Bitcoin is not going to go to zero and whatnot. And one way to think about what's going to cause the next stop is people like Tom Lee, right? Saying, what, Stretch is working, I'm going to do it too. Imagine, a lot of Stretch copycats in coming weeks and months that they see Stretch working and then they launch themselves. And it's kind of like repeating the DAT playbook all over again, right? Where we saw strategy do well and then we had all these copycats pump all these coins, and then when they stop buying, we all dumped, right? So why can't the same happen with these Stretch copycats? Digital credit, right? Tom Lee can say, oh, like this is digital credit backed by ETH staking yield, the future of finance. And then a lot of his retail followers are probably going to buy into that. And then that could send ETH higher. Other DATs can do the same. If this happens, you probably want to sell into those candles. That would probably be very dangerous. But like I said, I think too many people are focused on what could go wrong, and not a lot of people are focused on what could go right. And I think bears sound smart, but bulls make a lot of money, right? Bears sometimes make money, but generally you make more money being an optimist than a pessimist. And I think once the fear and greed hit sub 10, that was the time to be that was the time to have a more optimistic outlook on the industry. And as Charlie Munger says, rest in peace, the big money is not in the buying or selling, but in the waiting. Bull markets make you money, bear markets make you rich. In a bear market, you want to buy from people like that's like dumping near lows, and then once the bull market recovers, you can just hold, enjoy life, and then you'll come back from vacation, and then your back will be higher. That's what I'm trying to strive to be. I think what I want to do is to not sell too early. I think we all have the bear market PTSD with us, and I'm trying to shed that the mid-curve bear market PTSD out of my body. But I think better times are coming, and I think all it takes is higher prices for the industry to heal and mature. So that's gonna be for me. We'll see how it goes. My Stretch thesis relies on Stretch trading well. So as long as Stretch is doing well, I think Bitcoin will trade higher, and then Bitcoin trading higher will eventually lead to all season new metas. And I think that's in the cards. So I do think we are in a new bull market that started February of 2026. Feels kind of crazy now, but I think in hindsight, we'll look back to Bitcoin at 65K and ask ourselves, how did I not buy at those levels? How did I not buy other coins at those levels? And I think, I like my coins, right? I like my coins. Send these coins higher.
Voilà, bon, je pense que j'aime bien ces mots de la fin. Et il a posé ses couilles quand même avec son call bull market, d'après lui. Et dites-moi ce que vous en pensez, vous, ça m'intéresse. Franchement, ces arguments sont de bons arguments, mais je dirais que le maître de tout ça, ça reste quand même la TradFi. Et la TradFi est en train de faire un bull run de ouf en ce moment, avec Trump. Moi, je me rappelle, j'avais entendu un argument quand Trump s'est fait élire que les premières années de Trump vont être très mouvementées parce qu'il a tout le Sénat avec lui. Donc il peut faire à peu près ce qu'il veut. Mais avec les midterms, en fait, ça va être sûrement beaucoup plus nuancé. Il aura beaucoup moins de pouvoir après les midterms, en fait, les élections de mi-mandat. Donc, en général, c'est là où les marchés montent vraiment. Alors, bizarrement, ils sont quand même bien montés. Mais je sais plus quand est-ce qu'il s'est fait élire. Ça, c'était... Bon, en vrai, c'était vers là. Donc, en soi, un 20%. 20% avec des grosses zones de... des quand même. Donc bon, après, on pourra avoir peut-être une augmentation un peu plus pérenne, un peu plus stable. Je crois que si on regarde aussi... Il y a aussi un autre argument qui pourrait être bearish. Alors, il y a une vidéo qui est excellente sur une thésis bear. Je crois que si je fais... ouais... C'est celle-là. De Benjamin Cohen. Et la vidéo s'intitule... Bitcoin Dubious Speculation. Intéressante, et c'est une bonne explication d'une thèse baissière. Et en fait, alors qu'est-ce qu'il disait En fait, lui, il reproduit le dump alors je crois que c'est 2018. Lui, sa thèse, c'est qu'on est en train de reproduire le dump de 2018. Oula, bizarre que ça fasse ça. De 2018. Donc, attendez, je vais baisser, voilà. Hop. Donc, ce dump-là, et en fait, d'après lui, on serait vers là. vers là. Ce avec quoi perso je suis pas trop d'accord. En fait, je suis plus d'accord avec Taiki. Et en fait, tout va dépendre de cette semaine, mais ouais, je suis pas trop d'accord. En plus là, on est passé au-dessus de la moyenne mobile 21, enfin 20-21. Alors que là, bah, on n'était pas passé au-dessus. Donc pour moi, ces arguments, ils sont pas si foufou en fait. On voit qu'il est, en fait, on voit qu'il est clairement bloqué dans un scénario bearish. Et Taiki, en vrai, ses arguments sont quand même vraiment pas mal. Donc voilà, c'est à peu près tout. Je vais vous partager les notes de cette vidéo. Il va y avoir un lien dans la description. Je sais pas, je pense que je vais faire, vu que c'est la première vidéo où je fais ça, je pense que je vais avoir une page où en fait je mets toutes les notes de toutes les vidéos qu'on regarde ensemble. Et comme ça, vous pouvez juste appuyer sur un bouton, ça le copie, et après vous le mettez où vous voulez, sur un Google Doc, sur vos notes à vous. Voilà. Si vous voulez, vous pouvez faire comme moi. Vous mettez. Moi, j'utilise Obsidian du coup. Et en fait, j'ai une template qui s'appelle Market Talk. En fait, dès que quelqu'un va parler du marché, je mets ici l'auteur. Donc, si j'ai une page sur l'auteur, et éventuellement, je peux avoir un récapitulatif de tous ces avis sur le marché. Le biais, ça c'est intéressant. La date. Comme ça, après, vous pouvez tout classer par date. URL, comme ça, vous pouvez revenir. Ici, topics, donc moi, c'est crypto ou macro. Comme ça, après, je peux les classifier en soit crypto, soit macro. Et après, tags, ça, c'est pour pour juste les classer ensemble. Voilà. Bref, c'était un petit détail. Moi, je vais vous juste mettre les notes en description. Et j'espère que cette vidéo vous aura intéressé, que vous avez trouvé ça intéressant. Si c'est le cas, n'hésitez pas à me le dire en commentaire. Comme j'ai dit, moi je me base sur votre feedback et je me dis, quitte à partager des trucs, autant partager des trucs qui intéressent. Donc voilà. Et puis c'est tout pour cette vidéo. Voilà, on se retrouve très vite parce que j'ai une autre vidéo en tête que je vais regarder et je vais sûrement enregistrer avec vous. Voilà, à la prochaine.